Usually the committees get their requests in, and the office staff and the pastors get their request in, and council will put their priorities. And Shannon, our former bookkeeper, would basically make sure 24 was all up to date through September. Sometimes it wouldn't quite be September until about the middle of October. And all we had to do basically was go in and really tweak it. And sometimes it needed a lot of tweaking. But since we lost Shannon, and we have an accountant that's not on campus, so to speak, and an accountant that didn't have access to Servant Keeper, which is our database that your donations are tracked in, or the restricted funds, it was really a big job. And Pastor Vanacek kind of lined up our 24 for us, and then we had to build 25 from scratch. So it really did. We took everybody's requests like normal, but it was like that extra steps in there that we weren't used to having to do. So it was quite a job. So knowing that, we had a big thank you for the budget team. And those people were on the budget committee. None of them are in here right now except Coes. And of course, the pastors also were there, were present, and very helpful. And so the thank you was just going to be like me going, thank you very much to the budget team. They put in lots of long hours, and smaller groups met even extra time, and wrinkles were still being ironed out even last week. Okay, so starting with a brief summary of 2024, the surplus from 23 allowed us to do a lot of things, and we passed the surplus budget back in June, and we were able to share, save, and spend this, and some of that money is still coming into play in the 25 budget. So the current outlook, the congregation's generosity is continuing. We are right now at 107% of what was expected through September. I don't have the October numbers yet. So when we create the budget, we start with collecting the request from the committees and the staff. Council meets and they talk about, what do we want to target with the budget? What are our top priorities? And then the stewardship campaign happens. And the stewardship campaign isn't just something that develops in a month. It pretty much takes the whole year to really develop the stewardship campaign with the way you want to go. With the ministry moments that we did, and what we were calling a narrative budget, but to avoid confusion became called a ministry, what's it called? A ministry snapshot, which will be in the handout next week, to kind of give you a more storied view of where your dollars are going. So the stewardship campaign kicked off on August 25th, and it finished with Gratitude Sunday. Gratitude Sunday is very important because that's when we would get the congregation turns in their estimate of giving cards. Not everybody turns them in. So Janice tallies up the estimate of giving. She looks at history of people that continue to give even though they don't turn their cards in. She looks at plate offering and other things that come in, and there'll be a full report on that in your handout at the congregational meeting. But that's where we get the baseline of what we base our budget on. And it was a lot harder, again, like I said, because of the changing bookkeepers. The council's priorities were to increase giving to God, because a long time ago, before COVID, ELCA was a 10% a tithe to it, and it's just done nothing but go down, and we've been trying to booster it back up over the last few years. We have to incorporate the additional expense for the bookkeeper, IT, and insurance, because insurance costs continue to rise. We're absorbing Pastor Lisa's salary, because some of you may not know, but a large donation was given so that we could absorb Pastor Lisa into our budget. And at first it was 100% of her salary coming from that. Then it went to last year, 25% came from there, 75% came from the gift, and 25% was absorbed, and now this next year it'll be 50-50. So we are absorbing Pastor Lisa's salary pretty effectively. trying to give cost of living adjustments to the staff. We wanted to do more than 3. We were not able to. That's a little disappointing for some of us, but at least it's something. And they want to really emphasize the faith formation and youth ministry as a point to grow on next year. So the budget. Okay, so we'll start off with the income section at the very top of it, the revenue. Okay, so it states that we are proposing the balanced budget is based on $566,420 in revenue. Now I need to look at my notes because they're a little different. So how we came up with that number. Janice gives us what she thinks it will be, and her estimate was $554,000 coming in as revenue this year from offering to the general fund. And that's like a 10.5% increase over last year. How we got to the $566,420 is we took 98% of $54,000 to get $542,920. And then we added that to the Lenten offering, and the school gives us $1,000 a month to help cover expenses for the building and janitorial, and that's $12,000 a year. And then other income is donations such as the band uses the fellowship hall, and they donate $100 a month, and I think we had a wedding, and that was $350 of income. So we're just estimating that we will have about $1,500. It could be a little more. It could be a little less. The band's already said they're going to continue the $1,200, so the line should be pretty steady. In the years past, we based that top number off of 94%, not 98%. And it was because we were being very cautious because 2022 was a near shortfall without the generosity, the congregational givings in November and December. So we changed it to 98. Because 23 had $140,000 surplus, and 24 is headed toward a large surplus again. We're expecting it to be at around 70,000. So instead of basing that number at 94, we decided to do it at 98 so that it's in the budget already, and we don't continue to have these gigantic sums at the end to deal with. Not that that's a bad thing. So let's see. In the proposed budget, you can see on the 24 line at the bottom that we are expecting a pretty big surplus again this year. Don't know if it'll really happen. It's just how they get that is we look at the giving. We have giving through about mid-October in that budget. So you look at historical giving for October, November, December, and average out the last 3 years. Taking in consideration that 22 had a little extra in it because we were going to have a shortfall. And then that is how they're getting what they believe will be the end numbers in 2024. But because it still looks like there will be some kind of surplus, council wanted us to create something to do with it so it doesn't draw out all the way till June. And that's how we got the stretch budget, which we'll be talking about as we go through. Okay, so the first section on expenditures is the Giving to God section. So that total for 2025 is the 35,000 mark. If you look at 2024's estimate, or what we thought we would be giving to ELCA, it was around 14,000. But in reality, it's going to be over 24. And the reason that's so much is because giving was higher than expected, and it was based on 3%, plus the 8,000 that came in from the surplus budget is transferred into that. So that number was higher, and that's why it looks a little unusual. There's also in this budget for 25, we are increasing ELCA to 4.5% instead of 3. We had hoped for 5. Through 11 cycles, it was 5%, and on the 12th cycle, it went down to 4.5. And the reason for that was because on Monday, when we were I was starting to put this in the format for Peyton to put in that booklet you'll get next week. I found that one of Kyle's lines wasn't adding in the Excel document. And so it was 2,800 and something off. So by fixing that, we made the budget not balanced anymore, and it was 2,800 in the negative. So to correct that, we dropped ELCA from 5 to 4.5 to level that out. And so now the budget is balanced pretty close, -2 at the end, in case you've already looked at that. So that's what happened with the ELCA. Alms, we increased 500. Then you see at the bottom of that line, it says SB will increase it to 13,000. So what we're proposing is if there's money left over, 13,377 goes into giving. And where this is going is 500's going back into alms, because that was what we wanted to do. And another roughly just under 3,000 would go estimate to ELCA, because that's what we wanted to do. And we were also trying to put 10,000 back into community giving. We haven't had a community giving line in 2 years. We've focused our community giving from those monthly pleas as we've been doing, and we're probably still going to have a few monthly things come up, but they really wanted to try to build the actual giving back into the budget. So if we have a surplus that is 13,377 or higher, all of that will go back into the giving as long as you guys, the congregation, pass the budget and pass the stretch budget. So that's what that means on that slide. Do y'all have any questions about that? Good, you understand? No issues? You can also catch me later. The next section is the ministry of the lead pastor. I don't think there's anything too confusing on here. It pretty much stayed the same. We did give, everyone got a 3% cost of living raise, which is not a lot, but at least it is a little bit to demonstrate our faith in our staff. So we have a little cost of living percent in there. Any questions on the ministry of the pastor? Yeah, I'm changing these slides with my phone, and my phone keeps going to sleep, so I keep having to wake it up. Associate pastor, for Pastor Lisa's salary. Pastor Lisa is part-time. She's 5/8 time. She got a little raise also, and I think I've already addressed that 50% of her salary is in the budget, and 50% will be coming from the large fund that was donated. Our goal is that will be 75% next year, and it will continue to drop and let the budget pick it up because the fund will eventually be exhausted. Okay, in the worship category, let me catch my notes up. In the worship category, that's our budget in there. What ended up being cut in that the stretch budget would cover is we wanted to try to hire a nursery attendant, and we had $4,000 budgeted for that. So that was something that got cut to balance the budget. If the stretch budget passes, we would put that back in and attempt to find somebody who's willing to work in the nursery, because we're having a real hard time staffing that. And as a number of children increase, we kind of think it might be a good thing to have. The other cut in that section is from Olivia's budget, the worship and music budget. And we did still increase her budget about $2,000. But in that part of the budget is included like music licensing, sheet music, also the Altar Guild is in that section. So we did cut it just under, I think, $1,959, but it would be restored. Olivia said she could get by on what was granted, because, you know, whenever you're making a budget, you're going to pad it a little bit, but it would be helpful to have it back. So that is the plan, to restore it if the stretch budget passes. Y'all have any questions on worship? Sorry, phone went to sleep again. Okay, the youth and family ministry, it's mainly Kyle's line. Where this line got cut, $1,829, it was in the last line of the budget on that section. And We had 6,000 budgeted to that line in '24, and we kept it just a little over 6,000. Since this is a big priority with the council, we would really like to restore that. So again, if the stretch budget passes and there's enough money, this line would also be restored. Y'all have any questions? Okay, Christian education, under that budget heading, that line is just Sunday school and Bible school. And that's probably not really enough to run Bible school, but a lot of people donate money specifically for Bible school whenever we're closer, and we think that that is a fair number on that one. It's just a little bit higher than last year. Last year, we had an outside group come in from Cross Trails. I'm going, whatever trails, Cross Trails, and basically ran Bible school for us while we volunteered to help out, and I think we'll go back next year, because we'll have our full staff on board, and we'll be able to do Bible school like we've done in the past, so it won't be quite as expensive. Okay, parish ministry. In the parish ministry section, this year, for the first time since 2021, I think, all committees got some funding that they asked for. And I think everybody got everything they asked for, except social outreach. We cut $150. Council, vision, and retreat. In the past, in '24, what that line was the lead journey ministry. And the reason it didn't cost $3,500 or $3,000, can't remember the budget line, it was reduced $1,000 because of a grant we got. So we didn't spend that full line this year. The reason we're keeping it in the budget is because whenever council goes on retreat, it doesn't cost anything. We go to someone's house, and Dusty, in the past, since I've been on council, has led our planning sessions, and we get to know each other better, have dinner together, and it's a pleasant day. But we thought it might be nice if they were able to bring an outside person in to help with goal planning. And so that's something that council would consider using next year. There's maybe enough to fund it out of what is $1,500 left in there. But we did cut that line $1,000, and so when that line those lines would return $6,330. I didn't say this last time. One of the things being restored would be congregational life, push it back up a little bit. Social outreach would be pushed back up a little bit. $1,000 to the council vision retreat, and $3,180 returned to sabbatical fund. We cut the sabbatical line totally in the '25 budget. Part of that reason is because we still have until 2026, I believe, right, Pastor Lisa, when you go on sabbatical? And the sabbatical fund basically covers, other ministers that come in, and would cover Pastor Lisa's Sundays. And we do have some money put in there already, and we think this would be something we could cut, because it doesn't need to be as large as when we only had one pastor, and Pastor Vanacek would be gone, and it was a lot more coverage than we needed with two pastors. Plus, the congregation had a member step up when Pastor Vanacek went on his last sabbatical also. So we did cut that, and that's why that's a pretty big cut on parish ministry. That's where it came from. Again, if the stretch budget passes, we have enough funds, we'll restore all of that. Next section is the church administration section. We only cut $2,000 out of this section because, the office has to function and run. Important things of note in that section is you see the bookkeeper line went from being $12,000 to being over $24,000. We have an accounting firm now, not a bookkeeper. They tend to charge more, but we were really blessed with Shannon. She should have been charging us more, and she never did. Some weeks she would put in well over 20 hours, some weeks maybe 4 or 5. But if she was billing us straight up, we would have been paying at least $24,000 a year. So we knew that was going to go up, and that's why when we passed the surplus budget, we put an extra $10,000 in the bookkeeper line. So we will have used 5 of that by the end of December. The remaining $5,000 in the surplus budget will be drawn up from the reserves to help cover the bookkeeper expense. That means we're still absorbing $7,000 of that, which is pretty impressive because that was a pretty big amount to absorb in one line. The other thing in this section to pay attention to is Peyton, communications coordinator. Her hours were increased in the surplus budget 6 hours a week, and she is granted a $1,500 health stipend. This is still in play in 2025, and so the money from the surplus budget will draw into that to help support this budget line. So if you're wondering how that works, there's transfers in the very bottom, and the surplus budget amount that's transferring is down there. So you can see how that would transfer up into all these various categories. So, and Peyton got a 3% raise also. The computer tech line looks really crazy. I think the budget was $9,000, and the ending number for 24 is probably almost $20,000, $19,000 and something. To be remembered on that, we had $15,000 in the surplus budget that was passed in June, dedicated to technology. 10,000 of that has been used. And it was because we have a big upfront cost. One thing was an extra computer in this AV booth so that it runs more effectively for online streaming. And the other amount was, the biggest amount is probably moving all of the hub, basically, which they called the rat's nest, that was in the ceiling in the education building, out into the fellowship hall in that maintenance closet. And so that was a big expense to move all of that. Our future expenses in technology, the group we're working with doesn't do a monthly fee. If you need them, they come and they charge you for it. I think it's $350 a visit. Might be a little more with mileage. And but a lot of things they can answer remotely with a phone call. The reason we would have liked to boost that beyond the 14 is because they are recommending we start to replace some of the computers, on a rotating basis. And I think 3 was what they were suggesting this year. The 9,000 that was originally in there in the 24 budget, that line was mainly going to cover subscription fees to things like Flocknotes and the ministry scheduler and anything that is a technology thing that we have, along with the copier lease. So that budget line probably needs to be broken in 2 next year, separating the computer technology from the leases and the subscriptions. But that's what that's all about. There is still $5,000 in the surplus to support the $14,000 line. If the stretch budget passes and there's still funds left by the time they get to that line, we would add $2,100 back into the computer, so maybe they could actually replace some of those computers. Okay, sorry, phone went to sleep. Okay, operations and maintenance, we're almost to the bottom. Things to talk about in operations and maintenance. First of all, we also gave Donna a 3% raise, and I think I forgot to say that in the earlier meeting. There's a large overage you might notice in the building maintenance line from 2024. And that was because of the roof. So the roof ended up costing us $17,600 and something, like $17,652, and that was it. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about why that was so low, but how that $20,000 overage is, or that $17,000 overage is handled is, if you look in the bottom in the transfers, we transferred money out of the emergency fund to cover that difference in the budget, so it doesn't throw it all askew. And I'll talk a little bit more about that when we get down into the insurance part. Insurance in this same section. We also found, which was amazing that we found this kind of quite by accident in our fumbling around, we found that there was $16,000 error in the 2023 insurance. The 2023 final insurance number was $18,000, and we're all looking at it going, and I had what we had paid in 23 and 24 on a comparison sheet from our insurance company, because it renewed the end of August, and it said it was like $32,000 and something. So we called the insurance company, we talked to the accountant, and it was a mistake. So the way we account it for that is it's coming out of the surplus budget, but it's not really, because it's being absorbed by the extra money that is in the accounts. So we're not taking anything away from the surplus. It's done like that on the budget line, though. Insurance is something that we are concerned about, but we've been extremely, extremely, extremely lucky with the insurance. A lot of churches have been dropped. Their insurance has doubled. Our insurance went up $6,000, and that's it. And part of that is because we feel the need to buy a wind and hail policy. So I'm going to talk about that for just a minute. Last year, and for the past 6 years, according to Chuck, we have purchased a wind and hail policy. The wind and hail policy last year cost us $6,000 above what we would be scheduled to pay for our insurance. And when I'm saying our insurance, this big insurance package, most of it is property, but then there's also like liability insurance is in there, and what's it called when someone gets hurt? Workman's comp is in there, and there's a couple of other little insurances. I think there's something with auto to help cover the pastors. So there's little things in there. Those things don't add up to much. The big bulk is the property. So the reason we bought the wind and hail last year, my garage door just opened. The reason we bought the wind and hail last year was because our church buildings, meaning this big building, the sanctuary, the fellowship hall, and the education wing, is valued at over $5 million. It would cost, the deductible was 1%. Well, 1% on the treehouse, that's, $2,500. But 1% on this is a lot more than that. So by buying the wind and hail policy, we were able to buy down the deductible on the church to $10,000. Instead of being 65 or whatever it was going to be. In the numbers we got, it saved us about $65,000 by the time we did all this. So it was a good buy at $6,000 to get the roofs replaced. And it was almost like a blessing to us because the roof needed to be replaced. I don't know if you've ever noticed these dark spots up here in the front. And they were causing concern, and Steve was thinking that we might be needing to replace this roof soon, and we got a roof replaced for $17,000 basically, because that was our deductible that came out of pocket. And in reality, it cost us nothing. And the reason it really cost us nothing is we had a donor give us a donation to cover the cost, and more than cover the cost. I think that donation was $45,000, and we had another $2,500 donation. And so what was left was to stay in emergency funds. So we basically got new roofs, new screens, and all the hail repair, and it did not cost us anything, thanks to a generous donor and having that buy-down policy in there. So we were very, very fortunate. You'll see we did make that number go up quite a bit in '25. That is based on a 19% property insurance increase and a 10% increase on those subsidiary insurances that are included in that. This year, we had to pay almost $9,000 for the wind and hail. It was like $8,800 for the wind and hail policy. And we almost had to do it because instead of being 1% wind and hail, it was 2%, which would double it to where it's over $130,000 to replace the roofs before that would kick in. It cost us more, and it's not as good either, because instead of buying down this building to 10, it buys down this building to 60. And the reason we could do 60,000 is because we have over 60,000 in the emergency fund, so we could actually cover that this year. If it would happen again, we could cover it, whereas last year we couldn't. So yes, insurance is a concern, and hopefully we've hit that target right, and hopefully we won't have another hailstorm that makes us replace it. The stretch budget only cut out 1520, and it cut it out from building maintenance line. We did still increase the building maintenance line $2,500 over last year because our buildings are getting older. Okay, let's wake it back up. Go to the next one. You guys have any questions on that? That was a lot of info to suck in. Okay, the next section, miscellaneous. You won't see this section show up in the pamphlet that you get because in the past, Shannon put it in church administration. And it's supposed to just be the little section that is the fees. And those fees are assessed by credit cards and to a lesser degree on debit cards when you give online. Many people pay the fees, but not everybody does. And so we have to keep that in the budget to cover any fees that may happen. You'll also notice in 24, there's over $2,000 of uncategorized expenses. And this is usually an issue but Shannon would hunt them down. If she couldn't figure out what something was for, she would go find the person and say, what was this for and where does it go? So we're probably not going to have that when we have an off-site accountant. So it's really made clear a need that we need to have a purchasing policy in place that would designate the budget line. And then it would be so much easier for someone who's off-site and not familiar with our books like Shannon was to categorize it correctly. We think there's quite a few things that are categorized incorrectly right now that will take some time to get fixed just because they're not familiar with our books. And like I said, they didn't have access to Servant Keeper until recently. But hopefully that will get better. Oops, back up. In the bottom, you see the reserve funds, and you can see that we're going to put $8,500 into the emergency, $11,000 and change into the pastor's health fund, which I can talk about in a minute. But we're not putting any money into the building reserve fund just because we needed to cut to get the budget balanced. If we pass the I want to call it supplementary, the stretch budget. If we pass the stretch budget and the money lasts, it'll go back in to that reserve also, $8,500 as what we had hoped to put in there. Okay, stretch budget. So the stretch budget's on a separate piece of paper. Did you guys get that? I've pretty much gone through part one of what would be reinstated. The Budget Committee's thoughts on that was that it should be reinstated in that order. So if we only got $14,000, the giving is reinstated. And then it goes down the line. If there's money beyond the $39,615, we had 3 different ideas that went through and were, yes, let's do it. Okay, no. Let's do this. Okay, no. So finally, this is what we came up with. With that extra $16,000 coming out for insurance that we didn't know was coming out, we're kind of worried that maybe there's not enough float in our operating accounts. And we don't really know what's in there right now because we're still in transition with the bookkeeper. But by the end of 2024, once the numbers are finalized and we have a chance to analyze them and meet with the accountant and find out exactly where we are, we might want to just leave the funds in our operational accounts as an operational reserve. Because much like you with a checking account, you don't want to be just down to the wire. You like to have a little bit of float in there for when a little emergency comes up, like say we had to replace a 4th computer, and that's not in the budget, but it could come out of our operating reserve because it's not a huge expense. It would be maybe $1,200. We could afford to just take it out of there. You want to keep some money in operating reserves. We might have enough in operating reserves. We really don't know until the year ends and we can analyze it. If there's not enough in operating reserves, it's been suggested to try to build that up to about $30,000 at least in operating reserves. If there's plenty of money in the accounts and we don't need to keep any more in operating reserves, then council can decide what they want to do with the extra money beyond Part 1. So what has been suggested by the Budget Committee is, beyond leaving some in operating, would be to pay down the mortgage, because that mortgage, the interest rate will, I think, recalculate within a few years. I think it's 29. They might want to put it in one of our accounts, one of our reserve accounts. And in the note you have, it should say to giving. They might want to boost giving some more also, because we have been so blessed with generous giving. And when you're blessed with generous giving, you should feel compelled to spread the wealth, so to speak. So we kind of just leaving it in council's hands. Depending on the amount, if it's a lot, they might want to get suggestions from the congregation. I want to talk a little bit about those reserve funds that are in the bottom, because this was really an amazing thing for me to discover. So the big reserves we have are the emergency reserve, the building maintenance reserve, and the pastor's health care reserve. The health care reserve. So last year, Pastor Vanacek declined taking Portico, which is the health insurance that we have. He declined the health insurance because he went on Deborah's health insurance because it saved him money and it saved us money too. Pastor Lisa also is on Danny's insurance, so we don't pay for her health insurance either. We do give both a stipend to help cover the deductible. Even Kyle doesn't take the Portico health insurance. He's on his parents yet, so he also has a little stipend. This saves us a lot of money, but if something should happen to where maybe Deborah changes jobs and the insurance is not so great, PV might want to come back onto our health insurance, and it's very expensive. So we just want to suck up that large amount of money in 1 year. So we're building a health insurance reserve also and trying to make it, Carol told me it was estimated to be 2 years, wanted to build it up to $40,000. At the end of this year, it should be at 16. And how it got there was from the leftover savings from PV not taking it. Some of that money, $11,000 basically, went into that reserve, and then we put an extra $5,000 from the supplemental budget into that reserve. So that's how we got the 16. The big emergency reserve fund started this year at $38,000. Obviously not enough to cover a deductible. We budgeted $8,500 to that in '24. We put $25,000 extra when we passed the supplemental budget, and we had gifts equal to $47,500 go into that. And then we paid out the $17,682. So that top fund is over $100,000. So we're getting close to where we may not have to buy that wind and hail buy down in a couple of years. The building maintenance reserve started the year at 10, and with what we put in it this year, the $8,500 and $5,000 from the surplus, it should go up to $23,500. So all of those reserve funds are looking really healthy right now, which gives us extra cushion. Emergency reserve is meant for serious issues, big money expenses. And the building reserve is meant for smaller money expenses, like a giant plumbing bill that's $5,000, but it's not in the budget, so you can draw out of that. So looking ahead, I think looking ahead this year is much more promising than we felt in the past 2 years. What challenges I think we might have. So continuing to absorb Pastor Lisa's salary, going up to 75% next year, will be a challenge that we have, but we have met that challenge very successfully the past 2 years. I have no doubt we can beat it again. Another challenge we have is to continue to build those reserve fund goals, and they are well on their way. A big challenge we have is the insurance cost, as we've already talked about. But I feel so blessed from this year's insurance issue in the fact that we have everything repaired for no expense to the congregation due to the low deductible and the donation, that we have nothing to complain about. There are churches who are without insurance who are paying astronomical fees, and we are so blessed with this. I feel like we will be able to keep up, because with our reserve funds being strong, it can help us, because we can't really drop our insurance because we have a mortgage. So in spite of that being a problem, I just don't even feel sad about it. I just feel so happy about how it's going right now. And I know it can go downhill, but I just feel like we need to be thankful for this moment and having our insurance be what it was and really be successful on that. Another issue we are going to have, we'll still have to absorb the bookkeeper's extra $5,000. We'll still have to absorb a little bit of technology, but if we absorb 7,000 from the bookkeeper this year, I think an extra 5,000 next year would be doable. I don't know if we'll stay with this bookkeeping firm. It was really difficult process to find someone to do our books. We first sent Robert Walmack on council out to ask churches who they were using, and everybody that was being used was not taking new clients, or they wouldn't tell us who they were using, or it was in-house. And so I ended up going across the street just to ask them if they did that, and they did accounting services. They did not have any churches, but they did have some nonprofits. And we went with someone that was in Burnet, but they have also been bought out by a larger company in San Angelo. And so we ended up with just 2 quotes, which were roughly the same. PV has found us a possible another alternative if things don't work out, but I don't really, though it might save us some money, we'd still need our accounting in-house to be in hand to make it go more smoothly. So it's kind of just still, let's see if it works out and hope it does. It should get better now that they have the information they need, and we'll see if we get our reports in a timely manner. Another thing to consider in the future is we want to continue increasing our giving. Want to bring the ELCA gift back up to a tithe of 10%. It'll hopefully be 5% if the stretch budget passes. So we're on our way. And to me, and it's not even on here, the biggest thing that we have to work on that I think will be hard is keeping Olivia at extra 8 hours. So Olivia and Peyton's salaries are inflated. If you look at the end of 24 and you look at 25, it's much bigger. And that was because we granted Olivia 8 extra hours and a $1,500 stipend, and we granted Peyton extra 6 hours and a $1,500 stipend. That money is in play in the bottom, and it's going to be used to help to pay those salaries for this year. But after this year, the surplus budget is gone. So either we have to absorb them next year in 26, 25 it's covered in 26, or we'll have to decrease hours. So to me, this is a challenge because Olivia's already working way more than 20 hours. And not essentially, even though she's salaried, you want to make sure she's being compensated. So that to me is our biggest challenge is can we keep their hours up? And can we continue to give some raises? Because by giving a 3% raise last year, a 3% raise this year, we're still way behind inflation. So that's not like the only concern I personally have, and it's not even up there. So you guys have any questions? Okay, I want to finish with one thing. God is good. Our congregation is so blessed. And thank you all for being here today and for your generosity.